Hi everyone, this is Marc Zawel. I'm the co-founder of AcceptU. Excited to be here today to run you through a presentation on creating a strategy for round 3 MBA deadlines. Before I jump into it, I just wanted to draw your attention to two things. The first is that this presentation is available for download off of our website. And you see the link up there, learnmore.acceptu.com/round3. And then all of you who are in attendance today, and those of you who may be viewing this as a recording in the future, I'd encourage you to schedule an admissions assessment with one of AcceptU's former admissions officers. And you can sign up, again, on our website, learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. Before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information and background on AcceptU. We are an admissions counseling group comprised entirely of former admissions officers from top 25 MBA programs. Our counselors work exclusively by phone, Skype, and email. We've worked with hundreds of applicants through the admissions process, giving them a competitive advantage and placing them into the business schools of their choice. More than 90% of our past clients have been accepted to one of their top 3 choices. And then just to give you a little bit of background on myself as well as my colleague Stephen Friedfeld and our counselors here at AcceptU, I'm the author of Untangling the Ivy League, which is a admissions guidebook to highly selective colleges and universities. I'm a graduate of Cornell, earned my MBA from UNC Chapel Hill, was involved with admissions at Carolina, and have conducted alumni interviews for Cornell for about 10 years. My colleague Stephen, who I met at Cornell, has a master's from Columbia as well as a PhD from Rice, and Stephen has admissions experience from both Cornell as well as at Princeton. And then, as I mentioned, all of the counselors on our team are former MBA admissions officers from highly selective top 25 programs, schools like Columbia, Cornell, Stanford. We feel that former admissions officers can provide a level of insight and perspective into the process to applicants that in turn allow them to differentiate themselves and improve their chances of getting admitted. With that introduction, I want to just jump into the presentation. We'll have about 45 minutes for this presentation, and then if you have questions that come up over the course of the presentation, please chat them over, and then we'll set aside 10 or maybe 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as time permits. So for today, we've broken down this presentation into 4 different areas or sections. The first topic that I want to discuss with you all is why business schools offer round 3 deadlines. The answer has to do with trying to build a balanced class of incoming students, but it's important for you to understand why schools offer round 3 in order to make an informed decision about whether round 3 makes sense for you to apply to it in. The next topic is should you apply in round 3? We're going to go through some case studies. We'll talk about the types of applicants that should apply in round 3, the types of applicants that would perhaps be better off waiting to apply in round 1 of the next admission cycle, and hopefully give you some perspective about benefits and potential disadvantages to applying in these later rounds. Next, we're going to talk about if you do decide to apply in round 3, how your application strategy should differ. Application strategy is a really critical foundational component when you approach the admissions process. You have to think about your application strategically. And we'll talk a little bit about questions that you need to address in your application about why you're interested in MBA, why you're interested in MBA right now as opposed to, say, 6 months ago when round 1 opened, and hopefully give you some insight into how you build an application strategy for round 3. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some tips for applying in round 3. We had our team here at AcceptU put together three of, we feel, the most important tips if you are to move ahead with your round 3 application. So with all that said, let's get into it. We'll start with why business schools offer round 3 deadlines and this idea of trying to build a balanced class. I wanted to start just with a couple of myths about round 3 because there is a lot of misinformation about round 3, and I think that it's important to kind of get the facts straight. First, the acceptance rate in round 3 is always lower. And the reality is that fewer applicants apply in round 3. So when you're talking about the number of offers of admission in round 3, they will typically be lower. But it's not necessarily the overall acceptance rate in round 3, say, versus a round 2 or a round 1. The second myth is getting rejected in round 3 means you can simply reapply in the fall for round 1. And this is probably one of the most prevalent myths out there. It's not necessarily a myth because, yes, if you do apply in round 3 and you are rejected in round 3, you can certainly reapply in round 1. But you need to recognize that the reapplication process is different from the typical application process. And we'll talk a bit about scenarios in which you apply in round 3 and you're rejected in round 3 and what that looks like for, say, round 1 of a subsequent cycle. But the important thing to keep in mind is that you want to present yourself in the round in which you can put your best or your strongest foot forward. If that's in round 3 this year, then you probably will be a strong candidate for applying in round 3 if you meet some other criteria that we'll discuss later on in the presentation. And if you're better off strengthening your application over the next couple of months in preparation for round 1 of the next cycle, then that probably is a smart move to make. Finally, the last myth is international applicants will not have enough time to apply for visas if admitted in round 3. And through our experience, as long as you make a decision to accept an offer of admission somewhat quickly, there still should be plenty of time to get the paperwork in place or in order to come and study in the U.S. and apply for a visa this fall. I want to talk next about what we call the Round 3 Balancing Act, and it's the reason why this Balancing Act is the reason why business schools offer Round 3 as an option to applicants. By round 3, admissions officers have a pretty clear sense of what their incoming classes are going to look like. They've had thousands of applications and thousands of resumes, and they've made offers of admission, and they've also rejected many applicants. So they have a pretty good sense of what their incoming class looks like. Admissions officers, the goal of the application process is to build well-rounded and a diverse class. It's a misconception among many applicants that they have to be well-rounded as an applicant, when in reality you need to have a singular focus and you need to fit a certain spot within a greater class, and in turn allow admissions officers to build a really well-rounded and a diverse class. Diversity can take many forms. It can be professional diversity, it can be academic diversity, there can be personal diversity. I put a couple of examples up there. Future career interests, you might be able to lend some diversity there if you're interested in an area that is typically underrepresented when it comes to business school students. You might also have some diversity in terms of your prior work experience if you're coming from a non-traditional career path. There might be geographic diversity that you can lend if you're applying to business schools outside of the immediate geographic region in which you're living. There might be some gender diversity if you're applying to programs that are lopsided in their percentage of male versus female students, and business schools are trying to hit a 50-50 ratio. You might be able to lend some diversity there. Same with ethnic diversity or socioeconomic diversity, academic performance. Obviously, with that type of diversity, you're looking for exceptional academic performance, high, or if you're thinking about GPA or GMAT, diversity there would be having scores or having a GPA that is far beyond that of the average incoming student. As an example, let's take one business school and say that there was an influx of applicants this year that were interested in going into consulting. And consulting, along with finance, are typically two of the most popular professional areas of interest. There might also have been an overrepresentation of applicants from, say, Massachusetts. So if you're a consultant from Massachusetts, it's going to be critical for you to come across as differentiated in this process, because you already almost have two things working against you, which is your professional area of interest as well as your geographic location. If you don't fall, excuse me, into that category of a consultant from Massachusetts, then recognize that if you have some of that diversity that we've discussed, business schools do leave spaces in round 3 in order to further round out their classes. And that's really the most important thing to keep in mind, is that there are those spots available for those underrepresented applicants, but you need to fit that in order to really have a compelling shot at getting admitted to these schools in a later round. So business schools offer round 3 for a variety of reasons. It does vary from one business school to the next, but there are really 3 key reasons why business schools offer and set aside seats for round 3. As we discussed, the need for balance and the need for there to be diversity in their class. There's also this concern in the admissions world about losing an applicant that was the perfect applicant that you just overlooked. And we talk about this a little bit further down in the slide, but top business schools are always competing for top applicants. And it can be hard for you to think about that as an applicant, because you look at it from your perspective and it is highly, highly competitive to be admitted to these schools. But from the business school standpoint, it's also highly, highly competitive to attract the best applicants and to attract the best students. And so business schools, for those reasons, are in some amount of competition with one another, and they offer round 3 as a way to capture any outstanding applicants who just have not applied until this later stage. Finally, many international business schools have later application deadlines. And so in order to be competitive with these schools, many U.S. Business schools offer round 3, again, so that they don't overlook that diamond in the rough, quote unquote. The last thing to keep in mind about why business schools offer round 3 is that it does allow them an opportunity to increase their application volume. Not significantly. Certainly you don't see the application volume in round 3 as you do in, say, round 1 or round 2, but there is a fair amount, and a higher volume of applications typically means a lower acceptance rate. And the thing about a lower acceptance rate is that it allows a school to build some of its brand and its reputation and its prestige around the fact that it's admitting so few applicants, and it also in turn attracts students that are seeking slots or spaces at the top business schools in the country. So we talked now about why business schools offer round 3. I next want to discuss some of those case studies about whether you should apply in round 3, or if perhaps it makes more sense for you to apply, say, in round 1 of next year. You have to take a step back and ask yourself some high-level questions about what is leading you to applying now in round 3. Have you recently been laid off? Have you seen some recent stagnation in your career? The keywords there are recent. Have you not been admitted to other business schools? Maybe you've been waitlisted at some other programs that you applied to in, say, round 1 or round 2. Have you been working over the last couple of months to build a strong or stronger application? Maybe you've retaken the GMAT, maybe you've been working consistently on your essays or other application materials. Perhaps you've just completed a stint in the military, or you've just wrapped up a job rotation, and this is really your first opportunity for you to apply to business school. These are all various kind of scenarios that some of you may be considering at this time. And whether you should apply in round 3, regardless of these various scenarios, depends largely on how far along you are right now on this we call business school admissions journey, because it really is a journey. If you're just starting versus this is something that you've been working on for months, or something that you've known you've wanted to move ahead with for some time. So who should apply in round 3? You should be applying in this cycle if you can submit the strongest application that you can. If you have a strong GMAT score, if you have strong analytical and quantitative skills, all of which are an important criteria that's evaluated by admissions officers, then yes, consider applying in round 3. If you don't have a very strong GMAT score, if your GMAT score is falling in the lower part of that 80th percentile, if your GMAT score is below that, consider retaking the GMAT, consider taking a class at a local community college or online in order to bolster your application. Your essays. Have you been working on your essays? Do you have enough time now to build and tell a compelling story in your essays? And your essays really are such an important component to your application that you need to commit the same amount of time to your essays as you do the other pieces of your application, including your GMAT. Letters of recommendation. Have you already asked your letter writers? Have you given them enough time as well as guidance on how they can best support your applications? Many applicants think about the pieces of their application as insular, as just standalone pieces, but when it comes to admission strategy, you have to take kind of a high-level approach to your application. You have to think about what role your essays are going to play versus the role that your letters of recommendation are going to play versus the role that your resume is going to play versus the role that your interview is going to play. All of these pieces need to fit in, and all these pieces need to tell a certain part of your story, and when possible not have any redundancy or overlap between those pieces, because the space and the time in which you have to communicate your story and why you are different and why you're interested in that particular business school is so limited. Finally, consider demonstration of interest, which is an important criteria also that admissions officers are considering. Have you already started building relationships with the business schools that you're interested in? Have you visited them? Have you talked with students, current students or past students, alumni of the programs, current admissions officers? You want to build a relationship with the schools that you're going to be applying to. And generally, only those applicants that are already far along on this journey should apply in round 3, meaning those that have already taken the GMAT, have gotten the score that they feel is going to put them within a strong reach of these programs, have already started working on their essays, have already got the letters of recommendation in motion, have already gotten outreach or visits under their belt. Applicants that are early in this application journey but who feel they would help balance the class can also consider round 3. Meaning if you're going to be able to lend some diversity to this class, and we talked about the various ways that you can do so previously, and you haven't done much or any of these other pieces, that's okay. Because the diversity that you're going to bring, assuming that you can commit yourself to getting these pieces completed in time, will be so important to admissions officers when they're making decisions about round 3 applicants. Who should not apply in round 3? You really should not apply in round 3 if you've just decided to apply to business school, because it's unlikely that you've really given the time and the thought and the kind of the introspection about what your interests are, what you're looking to do after business school, your short-term goals, your long-term goals. And this lack of focus is going to be reflected in your application materials. And it can be a real issue because you're already combating the potential perception that you're applying later, so you haven't really gotten your act together soon enough. Now, maybe you haven't gotten your act together for a variety of reasons, and we talked about those a little bit earlier. But if you just recently decided to apply to business school, you probably are not going to have enough time to really give this the thought that it needs and the thought that it deserves. Not to mention the fact that you're about to commit to a degree that is timely, both in terms of opportunity cost as well as financial commitment. You need to make sure that you're going to business school for the right reasons, and you need to go to business school that is going to be the best fit for you. If you don't have strong enough quantitative or analytical skills and you would benefit from retaking the GMAT or taking a remedial course, whether locally or online, that's probably a good reason not to apply in this round either. Finally, it's important to keep in mind, for those of you who have not really fully engaged or started the application process, that applying to business school does require a really serious and dedicated effort. It's not something that you kind of do on the side. It's something that is can be all-consuming, and it's important that you have the time available to really commit yourself to this. Those who also should probably not apply in round 3 are those that are coming from overrepresented demographics or those on the border of being admitted academically. You might be saying, well, I don't care, I'm just going to apply in round 3 anyway. I would make an argument that the worst thing that could happen is you could be rejected, in which case you can just reapply in the next cycle. But you need to keep in mind that reapplicants have to show progress in their career or in their skill development or in their leadership development. And there's not going to be that much time between when you apply in round 3 and when you apply in round 1. So you're going to need to be able to show that development or that progress relatively quickly in order to put in a reapplication in round 1 next cycle. Another reason not to apply in round 3 is that the simplest way of thinking about it is put yourself in the shoes of an admissions officer who has gone and recruited around the country and likely around the world, spoken to thousands of applicants, reviewed thousands of essays, thousands of resumes, have been considering many impressive applicants and making lots of difficult decisions about whether to admit or reject those applicants. There can be a fair amount of just fatigue and skepticism about applicants in round 3. Now, what that means is as a round 3 applicant, you really have to be just honest and real. Admissions officers by this point in the game, they don't want to read what you think they want to read. They just want to learn about the applicants. And that goes without saying if you apply in round 3 or in round 1 or round 2. You need to be honest and candid and real, but it's especially important for those applicants that are putting in applications to round 3 because of that skepticism or fatigue of having gone through and reviewed so many applications at this late stage. The other way to consider this, and this is a way for me to counter my own argument, is that round 3, applying in round 3, even if you feel like you might not be admitted in round 3, could also put you on the radar for next year. Many business schools officially will say that denied applicants from round 3 are at no disadvantage reapplying in, say, round 1 of a subsequent cycle. So that's the official line. And applying in round 3 will allow you to start to put yourself on the radar of these admissions offices. We talked earlier about demonstration of interest and showing that you're serious and interested in these particular business schools by visiting or engaging with alumni or current students or professors. Perhaps the best way that you can show that you're interested in a school is by applying there. And applying in round 3 will, at a minimum, get you on that radar. You'll also, if you apply in round 3 and are not admitted in round 3 and then reapply, say, in round 1 or round 2 of next cycle, you'll show a certain level of persistence and dedication. And these are definitely qualities that admissions officers are looking to identify in applicants, especially if you show the type of progress and development that they're going to want to see between when you've submitted your application in round 3 and when you're applying as a reapplicant, say in round 1 or round 2. I just want to, I know that it's a counter argument to what I've been presenting here, but I think the bottom line is that the choice is really yours. And the goal of this presentation is to show you and to give you some insight into making an informed decision about applying, say, in round 3 or applying in a future round. You want to consider the potential benefits and the disadvantages about applying in round 3 and make the decision that at the end of the day will allow you to submit the strongest application. That's the most important thing. And then remember that if you do opt to reapply, you're going to need to show some progress or growth between when you applied in round 3 and when you reapplied in round 1 of next cycle. So we just went through whether you should apply in round 3. Now let's assume that you are going to apply in round 3, and let's talk specifically about how the strategy around your application and your application materials will differ in a round 3 versus a round 1 or a round 2. Now, whether you apply in round 3 or you apply in round 2 or you apply in round 1, you always need to keep a couple of questions in the back of your mind. Some of these questions are those that you're going to be directly prompted in the application process, typically through your essays or through an interview, but some of them are indirectly prompted. And if you're not directly prompted to answer some of these questions, then you want to thread your responses at a minimum through some of your essays so that you can show admissions officers that even though they're not directly asking you these questions, you have given them some sincere thought. The first is, why do you want to pursue an MBA now from this particular business school? I think that the really critical piece of this question is the now, meaning why do you want to pursue an MBA now as opposed to 2 months ago or 6 months ago or a year ago or next year? Why is now the right time for you to be applying to this business school? The second question is, what makes you different and what will you contribute? And the key here is the contribution and the different, because as we discussed earlier with round 3 and building a diverse and well-rounded classes, it has to be your contribution and how you're different than other applicants must be clear to admissions officers. And then the last question is, why do you want to pursue an MBA? And that's a very kind of high-level general question. But as we discussed earlier with applicants that perhaps that are not very far along on their admissions journey, if you are relatively new to thinking about business school and pursuing an MBA, you're probably not going to be able to answer this question very specifically. And you need to be very, very specific with this type of question. Admissions officers want to know about your short-term goals. They want to know about your long-term goals. And we'll talk now about each of these 3 questions, how you should be thinking about each of these questions as a round 3 applicant, and how in turn your responses to these questions need to be messaged throughout your application materials. So let's start with why you want to pursue an MBA now. As I said earlier, you need to make it clear that your thought process is sound, that you're not just applying on a whim, that you weren't just, say, laid off and now you're going to apply to business school. Certainly losing your job or getting laid off gives you an opportunity to apply to business school, but that's not really something that you want to use to justify your interest in going to business school. Your thought process needs to be a little bit longer term. When you're talking about why you want to pursue an MBA now, you want to, in particular, explain why you've waited until round 3 to apply. And this is all about being, as we discussed earlier, honest and open. Excuse me. Were you trying to raise your GMAT score? Were you taking a class at a local community college that was just wrapping up? Did you just finish up your rotation? Did you just get discharged from the military? Why in late January are you now thinking about applying to business school? Why weren't you thinking about it, or why weren't you putting in your application 2 months ago or 3 months ago or 4 months ago? Certainly not that you were unorganized, that you got rejected from your first choice. Those are not good reasons to be applying to these business schools in the third round. You want to create a sense of timeliness and urgency about enrolling this year, because admissions officers are going to be thinking, well, if we don't admit this applicant this year, we can just roll this applicant over into round 1 next year. Well, not roll them over. You're still going to have to reapply, but they're thinking, well, that applicant will likely reapply in the first or second round of next year, in which case you need to make it very clear that you have to go to business school this fall. If you're changing careers, why do you have to do that right now and not next fall? If you're looking to accelerate your career, how will not immediately achieving your goals through an MBA be detrimental? Think about what impact would going to business school next year versus going to business school this year have on you personally, professionally, and then try to build a logical argument that justifies why you must go to business school this fall as opposed to next fall. Why do you want to pursue an MBA from a particular business school? Far too many applications to top business schools are generic. They're not specific enough. And through no fault of the applicant, because as we discussed earlier, the application process can be time-consuming, and you try to make it a little bit easier by using, say, an essay from one school at another school, and not being as specific as possible about why this particular business school is of such interest to you. This question, when you think about it, is really a justification for why you should only apply in round 3 if you're relatively far along in this process. Because if you're not far along in this process, then you probably have not taken the steps to justify your interest in that particular school. So you want to cite why this particular program is the right fit for you. You want to talk also about the steps that you've taken in order to determine why this school is such a good fit for you. For example, you've visited or you've talked to students or ambassadors of the program. You've met with admissions officer reps at fairs or on the road. You've spoken with alumni in your immediate geographic region or city in which you live. All of this, those steps will help you identify programs that are the right fit. And fit is important for business schools because it's going to be more likely that you're able to achieve your goals if that school is a good fit. And business schools want to admit applicants that are going to achieve their goals. It sounds obvious, but one of the metrics that business schools are evaluated on is the percentage of graduates of their program who have full-time employment, say 3 months or 6 months out. So if you have unrealistic goals or expectations about what you'll be able to achieve coming out of their business school, they're less likely to admit you because they don't want to have an applicant who's not going to be realistic about what he or she will be able to achieve, because then they likely won't be able to achieve it, and then it'll reflect poorly on that business school. Your interest in these business schools can be based on a variety of factors. You want to consider the academics, you want to consider the professional, you want to consider the personal. The academic can be things like the professors or the programs or the courses or the study abroad. The professional can be the career placement, the internship opportunities, or the network. Personally, you can say things like the location is a real appeal to me, or the type of community, or the size of the class. Those are all justifications for why you feel that a particular business school is such a good fit for you. Now, you want to think also, because the round 3 process is trying to fill some gaps and build the diverse class, about what makes you different as an applicant. And now is really not the time to be modest about your differentiators or about your accomplishments. But it is important to think about both personal as well as professional. Professionally, consider things like your leadership, your community involvement, as we discussed earlier, your prior work experience, if that's, say, non-traditional work experience when it comes to business school applicants. Consider your future career interests if you're looking for a career outside of, say, management consulting and finance. It's going to be a good means for standing out because so many applicants are interested in those two professional areas. You also want to think about your accomplishments professionally. They can be both career, but they can also be academic. Personally, this is, and we'll talk about this in the next slide or two, a real means of differentiation because you as an applicant may have very similar professional differentiators, but you as an applicant cannot have any other personal differentiators that are like other applicants because they're personal. They are specific to you as a person, whether that's your interests, your hobbies, your diversity. Perhaps you've had some challenges that you've overcome, maybe your family or your upbringing. Those are all good means of personal differentiation. And as we talked about, you want to balance your personal with your professional. We feel that far too many applicants focus exclusively on professional differentiators. Of course, yes, we understand you're applying to business school, but so are all the other applicants. Admissions officers, they love the additional information section of resumes. They like to see who this applicant is as a person. It allows them in some ways to build a more concrete understanding of who this applicant is as a person. It allows them to create a connection with an applicant based on their personal interests or their personal differentiators. It allows them to come across as likable or interesting or compelling. Ideally, your personal and your professional differentiators will tie into your overall story. In answering those questions about your interest in business school and why you want to pursue an MBA. Speaking of, why do you want to pursue an MBA? And think about this question as a way to show admissions officers if you're looking to either accelerate your career or you're looking to change your career. It's again another opportunity for you to explain extenuating circumstances about why you're applying in round 3. If you are changing careers, the rationale for pursuing an MBA may be a little bit easier to justify because if you think about it, if you're saying I'm going to business school to accelerate my career and admissions officers are thinking about that, they might say, well, really you'll be able to achieve your same career objectives without an MBA. It'll just take you a little bit longer. Versus career changing, if you're in finance currently and you want to go into marketing, there's really nothing you can do outside of pursue an MBA in order to make that type of career change. So it's easier to justify why you're interested in going to business school. But that's not a reason alone for you to say that you want to go to business school in order to change careers, because when you say that you want to change careers, you have to answer a whole other set of questions, which is why do you want to change your career? And how can you justify why you're interested in what you say that you're interested in going into? If you want to go into marketing from finance, how can you show us that you've done your due diligence and you know that marketing is a good fit for you? And then lastly, we discussed this a little bit earlier, but is what you are interested in pursuing attainable? Is it realistic? Are you going to actually be able to do this, given your prior work experience, given the resources that are going to be available to you in business school? So I just want to wrap up with these 3 tips that we've tried to consolidate or condense from our team here of former MBA admissions officers and distill really for those of you that are considering round 3. The first is apply in round 3 for the right reasons. You should apply if extenuating circumstances have prevented you from applying earlier. You should apply if you feel that you can help balance the class, whether that's through personal or professional diversity. Don't apply if you just recently decided to go to business school. You might consider not applying if you fall into an overrepresented category. If you do fall into an overrepresented category, maybe you should try to play up your diversity in other ways. Maybe change your professional interests so that you're not in the same category as the vast majority of applicants, but make sure that it ties into your overall story and is something that's logical. And if you don't have that type of diversity, you really have to dig pretty hard, because if you don't offer any, you're going to have a pretty difficult time being successful in round 3. The second tip is just assessing round 3 versus round 1 next cycle. You want to just take a quick step back and think about, does it make more sense for me to apply now, or does it make more sense for me to apply next round? Do you have to go to business school this fall, or would next fall be okay? Are you considering applying in round 3 for the right reasons? Why are you applying in round 3? And then consider, if you are rejected in round 3, what type of progress will you be able to reference in your reapplication in the next cycle? You're going to have to, if you're a borderline candidate, if you think also that there's time for you to enhance your application, we talked earlier about perhaps quantitative or analytical skills or the GMAT, you should consider passing on round 3 and instead focusing on round 1 next cycle. And then finally, if you do decide to pursue round 3, have some fallback options. Are you going to stay at your current job? What potentially is going to change in your job if your supervisor now knows of your interest in pursuing an MBA? How might that impact your work over the next couple of months as you apply to business school and then wait to hear back and then potentially have to reapply next cycle? Maybe you'll take some time away. You can travel. You can volunteer if you have the luxury of doing something like that. If you do decide to take time away from work, certainly consider activities or experiences that are going to be aligned with your future career interests. It's going to make for a stronger justification for why you're interested in what you say professionally that you're interested in. Finally, have other options, but be confident in yourself. And make sure that this type of confidence is relayed in your application materials. Don't hold back with your applications. Certainly put forth a strong effort and put forth a strong argument for why you need to go to business school now and why you're applying in round 3, and you'll have as strong of a chance in round 3 as you would, say, in round 1. So to wrap up today, I think we covered a lot of ground. So I think it's always it can be beneficial to take our own step back and think about what we covered. We talked about why business schools offer round 3, this idea of balancing classes, whether you should apply in round 3 or wait until round 1 next cycle. We talked about how the strategy with your application would differ in round 3 versus, say, in a round 1 or round 2. And then finally, we pulled together 3 tips from our team here of former admissions officers for those of you who are going to be applying in round 3. So with that said, I do want to take any questions that have come in or that you may now have, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can given the time that we have available. And just remind all of you, especially those of you that might have tuned in a little bit late, that you can download this presentation off of our website, learnmore.acceptu.com/round3. And then I'd encourage those of you that are applying in round 3 or those of you who perhaps will be applying in round 1 or in future rounds to schedule an admissions assessment with one of our former admissions officers here at AcceptU, and you can do that by signing up on our website, learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. So let's see if there are any questions here that have come in. So there was a question about round 3 another one just came in too. Let me answer this one first because I think it'll apply to more of you listening. How much time should one allow for writing essays for one school? I think that it depends on how much time you can commit. I mean, you could spend days and weeks writing your essays if you commit a little bit of time to them, say, each day, or you could really focus on them and just knock them out, so to speak. I mean, regardless, you do need to give yourself enough time to put some thoughts together, get a draft together, get that draft edited or get feedback on that draft, make some corrections or changes to it. I would say that you leave yourself a couple of days for these essays, but also keep in mind, and it's important for you to do so, that essays get easier over time, because the first couple of essays you might not have written a personal essay about yourself since you applied to college. So it takes a little bit of time to get yourself back into the mindset of writing personal essays, but once you've done so, you'll see that a lot of the essays that are asked of you at the various business schools, there's a fair amount of overlap. You can start to talk about similar experiences, not reuse essays one to the next, but just talk about similar experiences or accomplishments. Excuse me. So it does get a little bit easier as you start to complete your applications and the essays. But I would say at a minimum, leave yourself a couple of days for these essays to really get going, maybe a week per application, but it depends on how much you can commit to it. If you're going to take a week off of work to just focus exclusively on your essays, you might be able to knock them all out in that time. It depends on how dedicated you are to the effort. What tips do you have to answer the question about tell me about yourself and showing diversity? As I said earlier, diversity can be either personal, it can be professional. If it's personal, think about things like challenges or your family or your upbringing or your socioeconomic or your ethnic past, your family structure, where you live. Those are all things that you can talk about personally. Professionally, think about leadership. Think about your future career goals. Think about your prior work experience. We've worked, our group has worked with many applicants through the process, and we'll often hear from our clients, I don't have any diversity to lend. I don't have anything that's unique about me, but it really takes a little bit of time to dig in before you see that every single one of you as an applicant is different and has something unique to contribute. So if you don't feel like you have that diversity, dig a little bit deeper, ask others, talk to others, and you'll be able to find what you need. There's a question here about, is a student at a disadvantage if they have a diverse application professionally and academically, yet a low GMAT score? That's a tough question. It depends on how low your GMAT score is. It also depends on whether you have other pieces of your application that could potentially offset your low GMAT score. If you have professional and academic diversity and you're applying in round 3, as we've discussed, that's really the critical piece there. But if you have a low GMAT score that is going to raise a red flag or concern about your ability to perform well in these highly rigorous core curriculums, then it doesn't matter if you have diversity. They're not going to admit an applicant that they feel like isn't going to be able to handle the coursework. So if you have a low GMAT score, the question is why, and also how much lower, and it also is what else do you have in your application or that you can use to back up your quantitative or your analytical skills to offset your low GMAT score. Another question here about GMAT. For a student who has taken the GMAT multiple times yet can't improve their scores, what should be their overall strategy? Tips for a bad test taker. Utilize the optional essay. And demonstrate your quantitative and your analytical skills in other capacities. If you're a bad test taker and you're also a humanities major and you also are, say, currently, I don't know, an editor at a magazine, you're going to have a very, very difficult time in this application process because they can't rely on your GMAT score for your quantitative and analytical skills. They can't look at your work experience. They can't look at your undergraduate experience. So they're just not going to be sure about you as an applicant. But if you have taken the GMAT multiple times and you haven't done well, but you have, say, an undergraduate degree in business, or you've taken a class at a local community college in accounting or in finance and you've gotten an A, or you work in a highly quantitative or analytical job function and you can have your letter of recommendation writer speak to that, then it can certainly compensate for your low GMAT score, and you should utilize the optional essay to explain that in a very kind of upfront and clear but concise way to admissions officers. How do you deal with the word limit for essays when you have too much to say to answering the essay questions? That's a interesting and kind of a funny question, because it is one of the biggest challenges of writing your application essays. You have to prioritize what is most important to you, and it's almost this is almost an exercise in restraint. And admissions officers are not just reading what you've written, but they're also thinking, why did this applicant decide to write about this? And so you have to prioritize what's most important to you. And if you can do that and ensure that what you're writing about also is in support of this overall application story and this overall application strategy, then you should have no trouble meeting those essay word counts. Let's see if there's any other questions. Feel free to send them over. I'll give it another couple seconds to see if there's any others. Oh, just one popped in. Has your team assisted international students looking for a second MBA? We have. AcceptU, we have counselors on our team that work specifically with our international clients, some of which have already pursued an MBA at another program. It's a pretty, well, it's a unique situation, and it's one that has to be, you need to, it's a unique situation, I guess it's the simplest way of saying it, and working with an applicant like that is unique in that we have to approach their essays and their rationale for why they're interested in going to business school to justify why a second MBA will give them what they weren't able to earn or receive with their first. So that's the short answer to your question, but I'd encourage you to contact us through our website or by giving our office a call if you wanted to discuss your specific situation further. One other question just came in. It says, I have a slightly offbeat profile and a somewhat diverse background. How do I bring it out? Do I just be obvious and state my profile, or bring it out through experiences? I mean, I think that you have to be creative in your approach to the essays. You have to think about what role each of the essays is going to play in support of your overall application and your interests. Also, think about trying to balance the personal and the professional. You're right, there are very tight word limits, but they're for a reason. And as I discussed with that previous question, it's about prioritizing what's most important to you and what you're putting forth as most important to admissions officers. Should you put personal reasons into your application to indicate why you're applying in round 3, for example, just moved from another city or just got married? Sure. I think that's, if you just got married and you just moved to another city and you haven't had an opportunity to get your application materials together, but you have been thinking about applying to business school for some time, that's the kind of candidate who's applying in round 3, and that's the type of candidate who should be seriously considered in round 3. So yes, I would encourage you to talk about some of these more personal reasons and being honest and candid about why you're applying in round 3 versus, say, in round 2 or in round 1. Let's see, we have another minute or two. If there's any other final questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Give it another couple of seconds to see if there's any others that came in. It looks like we are all done. I want to thank you all for joining me here discussing how you can create a strategy for round 3 MBA deadlines. AcceptU hosts webinars over the course of the year with our partners at Beat the GMAT, so I look forward to having additional conversations with you all over the coming months, and I'd encourage you again to please download this presentation from our website. The link is up on your screen, as well as sign up for an admissions assessment with one of our former admissions officers. But I want to just wrap up and thank you all again for joining me here today, or if you're watching a recording of this, I want to thank you for viewing it, and look forward to having you join us for a future webinar event here with Beat the GMAT.